It's 1988, and somewhere in a London studio, Kevin Shields is explaining to a very confused sound engineer why he needs to mic his guitar amplifier from inside a washing machine. This is a man who's about to spend 2 years and £250,000 making an album that sounds like angels having a nervous breakdown, and in the process nearly destroy his band, his record label, and possibly the entire concept of recorded music. But here's something about Loveless you won't find on Wikipedia. It was a full-scale assault on the laws of physics conducted by someone who'd clearly never heard the phrase, good enough. Kevin Shields wanted to invent new ways that sound could exist in space and time, even if it meant bankrupting everyone involved and driving his bandmates to the edge of madness. This is the story of how My Bloody Valentine created the most beautiful, expensive, and completely unhinged album in music history. Spoiler alert, it involves enough studio time to record the Beatles' entire catalog twice, recording techniques that shouldn't be legal, and an amount of weed that would make Snoop Dogg concerned. But before we dive into this gorgeous disaster of human obsession and sonic perfectionism, quick thing. If you're here because you love stories about musicians losing their absolute minds in pursuit of the perfect sound, smash that subscribe button, because I've got approximately 47 more tales of studio madness rattling around in my caffeine-addled brain. Also, like the video because Kevin would probably hate that I'm explaining his mysterious genius to the algorithm, which makes it even more satisfying. Right, let's get properly unhinged about the most unhinged album ever recorded. So, Dublin, early 80s. Kevin Shields is this weird, nerdy, obsessive kid who looks like he was assembled from spare parts by someone who'd only heard guitarists described in a fever dream. He's got this strange relationship with volume where normal levels of loudness feel like whispers, and he's convinced that guitars can do things nobody's figured out yet. He starts My Bloody Valentine in 1983 with Colm O'Keefe on drums, and at first, they're not quite the revolution yet. They're more like a ghost in the goth rock machine. While Irish music is busy with traditional rock or new wave, Kevin's already treating his guitar like an alien artifact that just happens to make musical sounds. The early My Bloody Valentine releases aren't world-changing, not yet. They're murky, gothy, noisy, soaked in post-punk reverb and deadpan vocals. You can hear the atmosphere forming, the experiments beginning, but it's still music made by humans using familiar tools, just pushing them toward unfamiliar places. Kevin's clearly building towards something, but nobody, maybe not even Kevin, knows what that something is. 1987. Belinda Butcher joins on vocals and guitar, and suddenly the chemistry changes completely. Belinda's voice is ethereal, almost ghostly, and when it combines with Kevin's increasingly abstract guitar work, something magical starts happening. It's like they've discovered a new color that didn't exist before. Isn't Anything comes out in 1988, and it's immediately obvious that My Bloody Valentine have stumbled onto something revolutionary. The guitars sound like weather patterns, like emotional states given physical form. Kevin's developed this technique where he's bending the tremolo arm while playing, creating these swoops and dives that make the music feel like it's breathing. But Kevin's not satisfied. He's never is. Isn't Anything is brilliant, but it's also just the beginning. He starts talking about making an album that will push music forward, which is the kind of statement that should make record labels very nervous, especially when it's coming from someone who's already shown a complete disregard for things like budgets and deadlines. Creation Records, run by Alan McGee, agrees to let Kevin make another album. This is their first mistake, though they don't know it yet. They're expecting another Isn't Anything, weird, noisy, but ultimately containable within the boundaries of what an album can be. Kevin has other plans. 1989, recording begins for what will become Loveless, and immediately it's clear that Kevin is operating on a completely different timeline than everyone else involved. While normal albums take weeks or months to record, Kevin's thinking in terms of geological time. He wants to experiment with every possible way a guitar can make sound, which means trying everything, keeping nothing, and starting over constantly. The first studio session lasts 6 months. 6 months for what's supposed to be a follow-up album. Kevin's building his own effects pedals, rewiring amplifiers, and developing recording techniques that have never been attempted before. He's treating the studio like a laboratory for sonic experimentation, except laboratories usually have some idea what they're trying to prove.
Creation Records starts getting nervous when the bills start rolling in. Studio time in London is expensive, and Kevin is using it like he has unlimited resources and unlimited time. He's not just recording songs, he's deconstructing the entire concept of what recorded music can be. The band dynamics start getting weird. Debbie Googe and Colm on drums are basically watching Kevin disappear into his own mind. Sessions will go for 12 hours with Kevin adjusting one guitar sound, trying different microphone placements, experimenting with effects chains that involve more equipment than most bands own. Belinda's caught between being Kevin's creative collaborator and watching him lose his grip on reality. Her vocals are crucial to the My Bloody Valentine sound, but Kevin is becoming so obsessed with guitar textures that everything else becomes secondary. And then there's the weed situation. Kevin's smoking industrial quantities of cannabis, which would be fine if it was helping him focus, but instead, it's making him even more obsessive about details that nobody else can hear. He'll spend hours adjusting the reverb on a snare drum hit that appears for 2 seconds in one song. He's convinced that every microscopic detail is crucial to the overall sound, which is either genius or insanity, and possibly both. The studio engineers are going insane. Kevin's asking them to do things that aren't technically possible with the equipment they have, so he starts bringing in his own equipment, then modifying that equipment, then building new equipment when the modifications aren't enough. One famous story involves Kevin wanting to record his guitar through a sampler, but not just any sampler. He wants to trigger guitar samples using the guitar itself, creating this recursive loop where the guitar is playing samples of itself playing samples of itself. It's like musical inception, except instead of dreams within dreams, it's feedback within feedback within feedback. The costs are spiraling completely out of control. What was supposed to be a reasonable follow-up album budget has turned into something that could fund a small movie. Creation Records is hemorrhaging money, and Kevin's response is basically, art can't be rushed. Alan McGee later describes the Loveless recording process as financial suicide, which gives you some idea of how pleasant a situation was from a business perspective. They're watching their biggest potential asset turn into their biggest liability in real time. But here's the thing about Kevin's obsession. It's producing results that nobody's ever heard before. The guitar sounds he's creating are genuinely revolutionary. He's figured out how to make guitars sound like orchestras, like weather systems, like emotions given physical form. The reverse reverb technique becomes legendary. Kevin's recording guitar parts, then reversing the reverb so it swells before the note hits instead of after. It's a simple concept that creates this otherworldly effect where the music seems to exist slightly outside of time. Then there's the glide guitar approach, where Kevin's using the tremolo arm in the Jazzmaster constantly, making every note bend and sway like it's floating in liquid. Combined with layers upon layers of effects and multiple guitar tracks, it creates this wall of sound that's somehow both overwhelming and intimate. The vocal recording process is equally mental. Kevin's got Belinda singing close to the microphone, but then burying her voice in the mix so it becomes another texture rather than a traditional vocal. Her words become unintelligible, but somehow that makes them more emotionally powerful. 1990 turns into 1991, and they're still recording. Different studios, different engineers, but always Kevin pushing for something just slightly beyond what's technically possible. He's developed his own language for describing sounds, soft loud, warm static, aggressive gentleness, that makes perfect sense to him and no sense to anyone else. The other band members are basically ghosts at this point. Debbie and Colm are showing up to sessions where Kevin's already recorded bass and drum parts using samplers and sequencers. They're in the band, but they're not really making the album anymore. Kevin is. Belinda is the only one whose contribution Kevin can't replicate artificially, so she becomes his primary collaborator in the madness. But even she's starting to crack under the pressure of perfectionism that has no endpoint. Creation Records is on the verge of bankruptcy. They've advanced so much money for Loveless that they can't afford to cancel it, but they also can't afford to continue it. It's the musical equivalent of being too deep to quit, but too broke to continue. And then, somehow, Kevin decides it's finished. November 1991, Loveless is finally released, and immediately everyone realizes that something genuinely unprecedented has happened. This is a new form of music that didn't exist before Kevin willed it into being. The critics lose their minds in the best possible way. They're struggling to find words to describe what they're hearing because the vocabulary for describing this kind of sound doesn't exist yet. It's rock music, but it's also ambient music, but it's also something completely new. The Only Shallow opens the album like a statement of intent. The influence is immediate and enormous. Every band with access to distortion pedals starts trying to recreate the My Bloody Valentine sound. Shoegaze was being developed for a long time, with precursors such as the Cocteau and the Beach Boys. Yeah, the Beach Boys. They're much more influential and revolutionary than you think, but Loveless was what truly birthed it,
With bands like Ride, Slowdive, and Lush building entire careers on variations of what Kevin started. But here's the tragic part. The album nearly destroys My Bloody Valentine in the process of creating them. The recording process was so intensive, so obsessive, so completely all-consuming that the band basically breaks apart from exhaustion. Kevin disappears into his own perfectionism. He starts working on a follow-up album immediately, but now he's got to top Loveless, which is like trying to improve on the concept of air. Every idea gets scrutinized, modified, rejected, and then scrutinized again. The other band members drift away. Debbie leaves in 1995, exhausted by Kevin's inability to finish anything. Combs sticks around longer, but eventually he also gets tired of being a supporting player in Kevin's one-man obsession with the perfect sound. Creation Records goes bankrupt, partly because of Loveless. Alan McGee later admits that the album was the beginning of the end for the label. They created a masterpiece that financially destroyed them. But the story of creation doesn't end there. Alan McGee had a saving grace. Or two. Two working-class siblings from Manchester. Boo, what a big coincidence. I did a video just about that. Check it out. Anyway, Kevin spends the next 22 years working on the follow-up album. 22 years! That's not writer's block, that's perfectionism so extreme it becomes a form of paralysis. He's so afraid of disappointing people who loved Loveless that he can't finish anything. MBV finally comes out in 2013, and it's good. Really good, actually. But it's also the sound of someone who's been trapped by their own genius for 2 decades. It's beautiful, but it's also sad. The sound of someone who created something so perfect that it ruined their ability to create anything else. The legacy of Loveless is complicated. It's one of the most influential albums ever made, inspiring everyone from Radiohead to Smashing Pumpkins to countless bedroom producers who sample Kevin's guitar sounds. The techniques Kevin developed are now standard parts of music production. But it's also a cautionary tale about what happens when perfectionism becomes pathological. Kevin created something beautiful and then became its prisoner. He proved that you can push music to places it's never been before, but the cost might be your sanity, your band, and your ability to ever do it again. Loveless is perfect, but perfection is a dangerous thing to achieve. Once you've made something flawless, how do you follow it? How do you improve on perfection? How do you live with the knowledge that you've already done your best work? Kevin Shields answered those questions by disappearing for 22 years, emerging only to prove that lightning doesn't strike in the same place twice. Loveless remains untouchable, unimprovable, and probably unrepeatable. It's the sound of someone pushing music as far as it can go and then being crushed by the weight of what they'd created. Beautiful, expensive, and completely mad, the perfect encapsulation of what happens when genius meets unlimited studio time and industrial quantities of cannabis. If this deep dive into studio madness and sonic perfectionism scrambled your brain in interesting ways, hit that subscribe button because I've got about 20 more stories of musicians who lost their minds making beautiful music. Also, like the video because Kevin would probably disapprove of reducing his life's work to algorithmic content, which makes your engagement even more satisfying. Right, I'm off to listen to Sometimes at maximum volume, get partially deaf, and contemplate how someone can spend 2 years making 37 minutes of music. See you in the comments, you beautiful, non-perfectionist bastards.